1982 was the most turbulent year in Charles Haughey's time as leader of Fianna Fáil. He would return to power, only to lead a government plagued by scandal and a party divided as never before.
He was a threat to democracy. He felt once you were the leader, you didn't have to put up with any nonsense. So people who posed any threat to you had to be dealt with, whatever it took.
They wanted to get rid of Charlie Haughey, and those of us who were determined that Charlie would stay on as leader, let's say we got to work.
I saw grown men break down and cry. I saw people, they're in fear of their livelihoods.
I was detained around the city, phone calls through the night.
This was about power, it was about the Taoiseach's job, it was about the future of Fianna Fáil.
I greet with open arms our famous leader Charlie Haughey into the Republican South Kerry.
From southern lands to western shores, the ancient cry of freedom roars. From northern hills to Leinster's doors, we'll rise and follow Charlie.
It was blood sport. You know, it was the Munster final, and it was like Ireland versus England, Glanson Road, on a very mucky day with the rain sheeting down and people taking lumps out of each other.
We could have sold tickets in Kildare for the Fianna Fáil meeting.
We'll rise and follow Charlie.
We used to have hundreds trying to get into them.
Hail the leader, hail the man.
It was February 1982. After an unhappy 9 months in opposition, Charles Haughey was on the election trail once again.
Politics were very polarised between Haughey and myself.
We'll rise and follow Charlie.
You made a monumental blunder.
That is a load of cods on it. You spoke of natural family planning. Phraseology was not used by the Protestant churches at all.
Dr. Fitzgerald's crusade, I think, was a major psychological and political disaster. I have to say that. That document is a list of figures. That document means nothing. Sure, anybody can. It's not an official document.
The fears and concerns about Haughey amongst a large part of the electorate were a perfectly appropriate thing to remind people of and to draw upon at election times, and we did.
Fancy meeting you here.
Good afternoon.
How are you? Are you visiting Kerry for a holiday?
Well, no, I'm just working here. Are you having a good day campaigning?
Good old style, rip-roaring type of politics, yes.
As Haughey toured the country battling for votes, it was clear that some were prepared to believe almost anything about him.
There were outrageous stories going around at the time. I mean, Charlie Haughey was supposed to be seen with a lady above in Phoenix Park and a black Mercedes, you know. And everyone loved to believe it, like it was a good story, but it wasn't true.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye. The party was divided. Recriminations were wholesale. Atmosphere was brutal. Every party meeting was tense.
There was the old Jack Lynch wing, now led by George Colley, and with Des O'Malley as the chief executive, as it were, and the Charles Haughey side of the party.
And we'll give you the clue this time.
Haughey made it to polling day with his leadership intact, but he knew his future depended on the result of the general election.
It was very difficult to know what sort of result was going to come out of it.
Let's look at the Kildare result. Charlie McCreevy increasing his vote by about 4,000 to top the poll.
As Mr. Haughey has exceeded the quota, I deem him to be elected.
It's only a computer prediction. Don't go rushing off to your bank or your bookmaker to claim your money.
I think this is going to be a very long night indeed.
We'll stay there and just make the last seat.
Well, Brian, if you give us 3 seats there, we'll be very pleased with you indeed, and you will, of course, be duly rewarded in due course.
Wise, 8,092.
I believe we're going to form the next government, yes.
So you think we may have a few upsets before the night's out still?
Well, Gemma see Fine Gael taking a Fianna Fáil seat. It's a swing of 3.9% to the government.
Labour perhaps doing less disappointingly than people might have feared.
Plus 7.2% to Fine Gael.
As Fianna Fáil's hopes of an overall majority faded, the threat to Haughey's leadership increased. The gauntlet was thrown down almost immediately.
I should think that the Fianna Fáil party will have a party meeting after the election for the purpose of
putting forward a candidate for the Taoiseachship, as is not the practice after all elections.
Does that not sound a little ominous for Mr. Haughey?
I don't think so.
We were disappointed about that. We thought this time
we hadn't won an overall majority. We should have. And so naturally, a number of us would be only too delighted to see a change of leadership.
In the days following the election, Haughey faced a battle on two fronts. To head off his enemies within Fianna Fáil, he would have to beat Garret FitzGerald in the race to form a new government. Each man needed the support of the newly elected independent TDs.
Haughey arrived along. We were sitting around an old wooden table, wooden chairs in Summerhill Parade. And he says, right, lads, he says, you know what I want, so what do yous want? And what we wanted was action. There were appalling housing conditions in the North Inner City at the time, vast unemployment and flats complexes and so on. And he says, right, lads, he says, you're pushing an open door on most of these things. But for Christ's sake, lads, I can't nationalise the effing banks.
Garret FitzGerald was also chasing Gregory's vote.
FitzGerald brought an interpreter with him in the form of Jim Mitchell, just in case he couldn't find his way around or understand what we were saying. Haughey was, I think he was more a man of the people, to be honest.
Listen, Charlie. Charlie, the devil knows better than the devil don't know.
He was a Northsider. We were all Northsiders. He'd grown up in the general area. He just had that common touch. FitzGerald certainly didn't have it.
As Haughey scrambled to do a deal with Gregory, the assault on his leadership was slowly taking shape.
I suppose it's termed a leadership coup, but if it was the worst one that I'd say in the world history. Couldn't make up their mind who was going to oppose him. They weren't capable of doing anything.
We never got our act together. I remember George Colley was in the room and Des O'Malley was in the room. And I remember saying to the two of them, which of you guys are going for the job? And there was silence.
I was reluctant to be the challenger because I thought Colley, as the person who had gone up for that office before, was the one who should.
I found myself with a few lonely moments, sitting there saying, well, hang on now, you know, who's going to slay the dragon?
They persuaded me, and I think Colley agreed that probably I had a better chance.
The leadership challenge was now out in the open. Haughey began to pressure Gregory to agree a deal.
Haughey came back with a beautifully embossed document, and I saw that it was all just general commitments. And I just handed it back to him, and I said, that's no use to us. And he was quite taken aback, and he said, what do you mean? And I said, we gave you a list of specifics.
As Haughey stumbled, Des O'Malley's challenge was also about to take a knock.
Bruce Arnold had been writing that Des O'Malley was going to win, and he had foretold that, predicted that he would get 47 votes in the parliamentary party, and named them in the paper. Well, now, you don't name people like that in the paper to somebody like me and to friends of mine. Really, those 47? Suddenly we had a little call to those of that 47 that needed to be called, and they were going to vote for Charlie Haughey.
Well, that finished it entirely. So should that give Charlie Haughey the list? They're the list of people that should concentrate on. They must be dithering, so you just put the pressure on them.
At the next party meeting, O'Malley's supporters were expected to push the leadership issue to a vote, but backed down at the 11th hour.
I was very disappointed that some people didn't see it through as I would have expected they would, and as they told me they would.
We all made a disgrace of ourselves and chickening out. And I made up my mind, by Jesus, I said, next time I'll do it myself, because I know the only one I'll trust will be myself.
Haughey had won without a fight, and the abortive heave had merely exposed division in the opposition camp.
Say I'm here. Ladies and Mr. Haughey, if you have any questions for him, I'm sure he'd be delighted to answer them. Within reason.
We are a totally united party, having arrived at a unanimous decision
without any dissent whatsoever.
Mr. Haughey, is there any significance in the fact that Mr. O'Malley is not present?
None at all. None at all. No, the people are here, just a few colleagues who happen to be around. None whatsoever.
Now just one hurdle remained in Haughey's path to the Taoiseach's office.
Whatever specifics Haughey was delivering, we wanted them signed and sealed in a written contract. So Haughey signed up and I signed, and as he was leaving, he grinned and he said, well, lads, as Al Capone used to say, it's nice doing business with us.
The next day, with the support of Tony Gregory and the Workers' Party, Charles Haughey became Taoiseach for the second time. Nervous TDs waited for the call to join his government.
In the few hours before the government was formed, Charles Haughey asked me to drop over to his office. On the way, I was getting handshakes from people, but it turned out he wanted to discuss something else. So I don't know if he did that deliberately or not. I don't think I'll ever know, but I know that the timing of it was such that my hopes were up a bit.
He had good men, but he had some right latchicos too, who felt that they were the Taoiseach, and the arrogance of some of them was unbelievable. Frank Hall had a great line about Charlie Haughey one time. I always liked it. He said he would trust Charlie, but he wouldn't trust the fellas that Charlie trusts. I'd have the same view.
He was far too indulgent of lesser quality people. There were people that he had in his government and persisted with over a long period of time, who in my view probably shouldn't have been left there.
Haughey had sidelined his enemies. Now he moved to take control of party funds.
He wanted to have his own man. I didn't suit, and he wanted to get rid of me, and I saw things differently and refused to go. He wanted to know who was subscribing. I said to him, look, I'll go once an audit is done, but I refuse to go until an audit is done. The members of the committee got an invitation to a meeting in Kinseely, and at the meeting, Mr. Haughey brought influence to bear on members of the committee to sign a document instructing me to hand over the books. But I didn't hand over those books until the audit was done, and not a minute sooner.
Taking control of the economy was a much tougher proposition. Haughey was committed to reining in public spending, but the Gregory deal alone would cost £80 million in 1982.
The first priority is getting the public finances in order. This is precisely one of the areas where you've been most criticised and most under attack, that it's what you haven't done.
Don't be spreading more of this gloom and doom and despair.
Today, the budget deficit is at a record level.
Inflation and unemployment among the highest in Europe. Mr. Haughey's instinct is to counter
absolute rigid control
at 10%. That means cutting foreign debts equals £1,200 for every man, woman and child in the country.
Things were very difficult in 1982. The economy was in rag order. There was a disunity and there was a lack of morale generally in the party. God, we got terrible press.
I was writing strongly critical articles about Haughey's lack of leadership at a time of crisis, really, for the country.
RTÉ are out to get me. The independent newspapers don't love me. You know, the Irish Times is, full of liberal pinkos. What's going on down there? Who's running that place? Who wrote that leading article? How do I know who wrote it? Don't give me any smart answers. You just go on and get on the case. Tell them, fuck all, I said. Don't tell them anything. I said, I can't do that. Well, you can do that. That's all I'm telling you this evening. Now, go off. Don't be annoying me. I have more important things to do. I play these games with you, this kind of mind games.
I would often get blamed for things and get sermonised for things that I had nothing to do with, because, as he put it himself once, O'Donnell, you're the nearest backside that can be kicked, so you're getting kicked.
He has a volcanic nuclear temper. Sometimes he could just
take so much and he would explode. One of Mr. Haughey's really trusted advisors said to me, Catherine, if you don't tell him at least to foxtrot Oscar, on one occasion he said, you're lost. You'll have lost it. You won't be able to deal with him. So I was called in to be grilled. I said, well, if you weren't Taoiseach, I'd tell you to foxtrot Oscar. But you are Taoiseach, so I won't. And Mr. Haughey smiled at me, said, I think we understand each other perfectly.
I remember being in the old Dáil restaurant with several Fianna Fáil TDs at the time, and Haughey coming in and sitting down at the table. And the other people at that table were I don't know how to describe it, but were quivering with, I presume, fear.
Grown men would be terrified of him, would talk to you in corridors or behind bushes or go over to Merrion Square or talk to you on the telephone because they wouldn't be seen talking to you in the house. And I found it absolutely extraordinary that he could terrify people like that. There was a very substantial minority of people in Fianna Fáil who did not wish to see him as leader. Therefore, you constantly had leaks, sources coming forward, so that this stuff could go into the media.
Convinced that confidential information was being leaked from the Cabinet, Haughey and Justice Minister Sean Doherty set about finding who was responsible. Haughey summoned the head of Garda Intelligence to a meeting.
He told me quite clearly that he was worried about leaks appearing in the paper, which, according to himself, and it was common knowledge at the time, that they were coming from the Cabinet table. That was as simple. He asked me, could I do anything about it to find out what was going on? Sean Doherty then came to me when he arrived in my office. He said, were there ever journalist taps before? And I said, yes, there were. Well, he says, the Independent is carrying an awful lot of stuff. Yes, says I to him. And Bruce Arnold, says I, is the driving force there. He says, could we put a tap on him? Says I, a tap could be put on him. And says I, it can only be put on for a short time.
Within weeks, tapes of Bruce Arnold's phone conversations were being recorded at the GPO in Dublin. Shortly afterwards, Doherty gave the go-ahead for a tap on Geraldine Kennedy's phone.
The only lawful basis for tapping people in the state at that time was that you were involved in crime, right, or in subversive activity. The grounds put forward were completely illegitimate and subsequently proved to be unlawful.
That I could be seen as some kind of subversive or spy on behalf of the British. It was so absurd and so insulting to my integrity as a journalist as to be incredible.
Despite Haughey's later denials, Joe Ainsworth believes that knowledge of the tapping went all the way to the top.
I was with the Commissioner in Mr. Haughey's office, and he broached the question of the leaks again. And I said to him quite clearly, I was doing what I could, but I didn't tell him that there was a phone tap put on Bruce Arnold's phone. But I'm sure he would have thought in his mind that one of the methods that I would adopt was to carry out phone tapping.
Morning, beautiful children.
Haughey seemed to enjoy the air of mystery that surrounded his life. He was apparently able to maintain a mansion, a stud farm, and an island, all on a Taoiseach's salary.
When we were in McGill, there were all these lists of stories going around all the time. The first one was always Charles Haughey's money. Where did it come from? And it was like a running joke. But they had a sense that, there was an element of the loaves and fishes about Charles Haughey's wealth, that somehow it didn't compute.
The secrets of Haughey's wealth were well hidden. His old friend Des Traynor had set up an elaborate system of offshore accounts for Haughey and other wealthy clients.
Now it was a small select group who had access to Traynor, who effectively took money which may have been declared to the taxman but usually hadn't been declared to the taxman, placed it in bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, except it wasn't placed in the Cayman Islands. It was still available to them in Dublin, hidden from the authorities. Massive sums of money.
If you have the Taoiseach of a country having his own personal advisor, running a secret bank account and allowing a number of privileged people to participate in this scam for avoiding their tax, of course it's corruption.
Haughey would later deny he knew anything of Traynor's activities on his behalf. Yet the two men were in constant contact.
Well, I would usually be at Abbeyville at the weekend, and I would see Des Traynor on a Saturday or Sunday morning. And occasionally, during the weekdays, well, very occasionally, in government buildings. And I came to the conclusion that Mr. Haughey had benefactors from the time he became Taoiseach, right up until the time he retired, because he had just his Taoiseach salary.
The search for explanations of Haughey's lifestyle led journalists to look at John Byrne, a wealthy property developer. In the early 80s, Byrne was seeking planning permission for 2,000 houses at Baldoyle, a few miles from Kinseely.
One way of dealing with Haughey's problems would be if you could bust up the Greenbelt. Baldoyle Racecourse had been closed. Supposing you could get water and sewerage through that, you could build a lot of houses. Then you could run the sewer back up towards Kinseely, and you'd have another few hundred acres of nice green development land. So that was one of the things I was also trying to probe at that very stage.
But all observers could point to was Haughey's friendship with Byrne and the presence of Des Traynor on the board of his property company. Byrne dismissed claims of Haughey's involvement in his Baldoyle development.
Absolute rubbish. Mr. Haughey has no interest whatsoever, directly or indirectly.
John Byrne has always denied being a financial supporter of Charles Haughey. Although a cheque from him for £50,000 was later shown to have been lodged into one of Haughey's accounts, Byrne maintained he had no idea how this had happened. In any case, the development at Baldoyle was refused planning permission. The key to Haughey's lifestyle evidently lay elsewhere.
The frustration for me during all that period was, in one sense, I knew a lot, and in another sense, I knew nothing.
In Charles Haughey's government, anything seemed possible. All the rumours about his wealth were nothing compared to the storm of scandals that were about to break.
Everybody suspected the weirdest things at the time.
Things were happening every single month. These were exciting times. They were pretty vicious at times as well.
Haughey's election agent, Pat O'Connor, was charged with voting twice in February, but was acquitted on appeal.
We always heard that Fianna Fáil were always good at election time for voting early and vote often.
The world has gone mad today, and good's bad.
Haughey's Justice Minister, Sean Doherty, was also under constant fire in the Department of Justice.
Today, that woman prize today.
Stories began to emerge about him threatening to transfer guards in Roscommon. The rumour mill ran at full tide with Mr. Haughey, and often you'd say that couldn't possibly be true.
That anything goes.
As I would mount the steps of government buildings, I would say in my mind, oh God, I wonder what horrors are about to unleash themselves today, you know.
Mr. Connolly's association with a man who's been charged with 2 murders.
In August, Ireland's most wanted man was found living in the Attorney General's apartment.
The AG, member of your government, and a murderer in his apartment. I mean, what worse can you get?
The world has gone mad.
The Attorney General was in no way implicated in the murders, and the Taoiseach let him fly to the States on holiday as the crisis broke. But in the ensuing uproar, Connolly was forced to return.
Could you talk to us tomorrow morning, please?
No, Mr. Haughey was not involved with the murder.
MacArthur had ran the gauntlet of a hostile crowd.
I think at that stage Mr. Haughey had entirely lost his judgment, but I think actually he was very, very, very shocked, as was the whole country at the time.
A grotesque situation.
Literally unbelievable.
Bizarre.
Unprecedented.
As the government lurched from one scandal to another, one deputy decided he'd finally had enough of Charles Haughey's leadership.
Came out of the blue McCreevy just walked into Leinster House and just puts down a motion of no confidence in Charlie Haughey as leader of the Fianna Fáil party.
When Charlie McCreevy moved in October '82, that was within about 2 weeks of the publication of The Way Forward.
This plan is endorsed by the central bank.
It was just the point at which Charlie Haughey really was about to get a grip on the economy.
Des O'Malley was somewhere abroad leading a trade mission or an IDA mission, and was absolutely horrified when his private secretary rang him to say that this idiot in Kildare had put down this motion of conflict with Charlie Haughey. He knew nothing about it.
I was in bed, not asleep, but sick with diarrhea because I got Spanish tummy. The phone rang, and I was told that McCreevy had put down a motion of no confidence.
What was your real motive in calling this vote?
Can you just
give us a quick word?
Mr. O'Malley, perhaps you could give us some comment. I said, well, why the hell did you do this? And he said, I'm fed up with it all. I wanted to bring it to a head. He used a few expletives about it. Something about shitting or getting off the pot.
I didn't care, because one thing I was made up, there was going to be a bloody vote. And this time, we weren't going to back off, and there was.
Taoiseach, are you confident about tonight's meeting?
This was the beginning of one of the darkest episodes in Fianna Fáil's history. Charles Haughey was facing the first real threat to his leadership, and survival would mean a bitter fight.
I'm absolutely, totally and completely confident about the outcome.
You're confident that you will win, Taoiseach?
Yes, certainly.
Once you're the leader, you didn't have to put up with any nonsense. People who posed any threat to you had to be dealt with, whatever it took.
Whatever tactics he used was all through other people. He never encouraged us to do anything. We came together as a group, and we knew what had to be done.
All of his supporters are on the phone telling you that you're a traitor and you're a disgrace. They would be extremely abusive. And I did feel intimidated and I did feel afraid.
Let's say we persuaded some.
I saw grown men break down and cry. I saw people, they were in fear of their livelihoods and their families, and the pressure was absolutely immense.
If you can't stand the heat in the kitchen, leave the kitchen. This is not for beginners. National politics.
People rang my house saying he'd be knocked off coming home, the dual carriage and all that type of thing.
Well, I was tailed around the city, phone calls through the night. They could be just from supporters, you never know that. I mean, I can't say that Charlie Haughey knew of any of these things.
My phone was interfered with, and there were periods when it was obvious that my house was under surveillance.
They wanted to believe that I was some kind of malign figure, locked away in, his mansion, plotting badness. I didn't believe it then, and I don't believe it now.
On October 6th, the party debated McCreevy's motion late into the night. It was pushed to an open vote, which Haughey won easily. Afterwards, his supporters celebrated outside the Dáil.
They'd been drinking around the bars all day in Leinster House, and I remember the captain of the guard said to me, "I would leave by the back entrance," and I said, "I came in by the front and I'm going out by the front." So just when they'd be out, there was all this roaring and shouting and yahooing and the usual.
As Jim Gibbons was leaving the house that night, a number of men attacked him. And fortunately, he was saved because a good friend of his happened to be close by, had brought a kind of a sword with him. And he just whipped that out and said, "Get off that man or I'll kill every one of you." And that's what saved Jim Gibbons' life. Jim had a heart attack, of course, shortly after that.
Oh, it's all right, relax.
For the second time in 8 months, Haughey had survived. But his past was about to catch up with him. Details of the phone tapping had been leaked to Garrett Fitzgerald.
the guards were deeply unhappy about their politicisation, and that led them to give information to the opposition. I think you can't have a state in which the police are so alienated from what they see as corruption in government that they start coming to the opposition. The country shouldn't run like that.
I know that at that time that there were some people in the army, right, who were worried about how solid the state was.
By November 82, the wheels were set in motion. The Workers' Party had withdrawn their support for Haughey over his tough economic plans. Fitzgerald saw his chance and tabled a motion of no confidence.
On the day the government fell, I just said that Haughey had acted with honour and integrity towards me and towards the arrangements that he had made. People got houses and a lot of people got jobs in the North Inner City and in other areas. He came up and he just thanked me for what I said, and I said the only reason I said it is because it was true, and you know it's true, so it's no big deal.
And indeed with us in Studio One, the Taoiseach.
3 weeks later, at the end of a gruelling election campaign, Charles Haughey watched as his chances of staying in office drained away.
Indications are that Fianna Fáil cannot form a single-party overall majority government.
We see that there is a swing against the government.
The kind of alternative to be talked about would be a coalition. As you know, the sort of situation that you're now in, Sligo, Leitrim. But here's the third time round you've been refused. That's never happened. That is unprecedented for a leader of Fianna Fáil.
I fought a good fight in adverse circumstances.
After just 9 months in government, Haughey was out once more. And as he faced into opposition, the new Taoiseach, Garret Fitzgerald, prepared to reveal the secrets that could bring him down. In January 1983, Charles Haughey was out of power, and the secrets of his Gubu government were about to catch up with him. The new Fine Gael-led coalition was preparing to break one of the biggest scandals in Irish political history.
I'm going to cabinet meeting. Will there be resignation?
Garda Deputy Commissioner Joseph Ainsworth and Commissioner Patrick McLaughlin to quit the force.
have retired.
Recording a political conversation.
Legal crisis in the Republic.
Mr. Doherty initiated both taps. The checks and balances which should operate within the system no longer operated.
That was a pretty serious thing to the security and to the democracy of the state, that the people would know that these things were happening.
I came out with the view that on the principle of ultimate responsibility, that Mr. Haughey, as leader of the party, had ultimate responsibility for what did happen.
As the phone tapping scandal broke, another secret recording was about to surface. This time, money was at the centre of the controversy.
Rumours had been doing the rounds that certain supporters of Charlie Haughey were financially beholden to him. Ray McSharry's name was being mentioned. Martin O'Donoghue was reported as saying to some, if Ray McSharry is a problem, we can sort it out for him.
While there was no evidence to back up the rumours, they sparked a dramatic sequence of events.
Well, McSharry was furious. Absolutely furious.
So Ray McSharry decided that to have solid evidence, he would need to have a recording.
In October 82, Ray McSharry used Garda equipment to record a conversation with fellow Minister Martin O'Donoghue.
We went to McSharry to talk about what about trying to arrange a change of leadership. Haughey had a lot of financial problems, couldn't prove it, but to me that made it all the more important that he should go quickly as leader before he did even more damage.
It seemed now that the spotlight was about to be turned on Haughey's finances.
Both Ray McSharry and Sean Doherty went in to see Mr. Haughey. And after a couple of minutes, Ray McSharry came out and said, "Catherine, Mr. Haughey is not feeling very well, will you come in?" Ray McSharry had told him that he had recorded a meeting with Martin O'Donoghue. Mr. Haughey was shaking and stunned, absolutely stunned.
Haughey had reason to worry. In early 83, journalists were drawing closer to the truth about his finances.
There was one guy in AIB who
was going around town telling everybody who was prepared to listen that Haughey had a situation with AIB and owed $1 million.
And if he'd owed $1 million, and if you could write the story, he then would be a bankrupt, so he couldn't be a member of the Dáil. That was the political implication of it as well. And I went to check out that story, and eventually got it confirmed satisfactorily from within the bank.
The story of Haughey's debt was published in the evening press. He was now under attack from all sides. When the inevitable leadership challenge came in February, Haughey's time, it seemed, was up.
It was very, very bad, the bugging of the journalists' telephones. So I decided then that I was going to put down the motion calling on Charlie to resign.
It was absolutely touch and go. I remember going in one morning and being handed a draft resignation statement and asked to complete it.
What was the mood of Mr. Haughey last
Great.
night?
Great, not bother on him.
Confident?
Yeah. I think he felt alone and isolated, and was almost to the point where I would say we thought that that was it.
Do you think Mr. Haughey will remain as leader?
Be his decision anyway, that's for sure.
And I think everybody had written Mr. Haughey off, and I think he was actually quite close to resignation at one stage. But then he, in an instant, I think, decided to fight back.
Charles Haughey once told me that nothing is impossible, the impossible just takes a little bit longer.
Haughey was going to fight, but he needed time to rally his troops before the next parliamentary party meeting.
Something happened that made it possible for Charlie Haughey to regain the ground. Clem Coughlin, TD, was tragically killed in a car accident, and the parliamentary party meeting was adjourned.
The chairman, Jim Tunney, who was being snarled at by Haughey to adjourn the meeting, and finally he adjourned it, running out the door and shouting back in Irish that the meeting was adjourned for a week.
And we had time to organise.
With the meeting postponed, the fight back began. First, the stories about his finances.
The banks usually don't comment on newspaper stories about their clients. But in this instance, the bank did issue a statement. It gave the distinct impression that the story was wrong and that Haughey hadn't had this huge overdraft. We don't really know how it came about that the bank came to issue this statement.
Sean Doherty would take the fall for the phone tapping.
I have no knowledge whatever of any of these activities, and I know nothing about them.
Sean Doherty said to me, he says, I carried the can for all this, you know. And I said, I know you did. His reputation was absolutely and utterly destroyed by it.
Doherty was disappointed and continued to be disappointed for a long time.
The external threats had been seen off. Haughey now turned to his party.
I said to him, you know, we haven't enough candidates in the list looking for your job. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, you know, we need confusion.
Should the party choose you, a leader is entitled to dignity and loyalty from his party.
Will your hat be in the ring?
Well, I mean, I perhaps might say, you know, I must be, in a sense, flattered.
Will your hat be in the ring?
Look, there's an old Irish shanachal, you know, that says, it's Shahar Ska Chéile of Warren Nadina.
And of course, that added more confusion because you're Jerry Collins, the candidate to the list, and you have Michael Kennedy, and then you'd have himself. So at that point, it kind of helped, you know, focus the parliamentary party's mind that there was going to be this three-way divide, and that wasn't a very healthy thing.
With confusion sown in Leinster House, Haughey made a public appeal to the party grassroots.
Charlie had said that as far as he was concerned, the parliamentary party couldn't fire him, that he was going to call a special Ardèche, and they would decide. This is it, the dictatorship has finally arrived, you know?
The days leading up to the vote saw sinister developments. Ben Briscoe, who tabled the no-confidence motion, found his Jewish roots had become a focus of intimidation.
We were ringing up and saying that Hitler should have finished the job. Even on the day of my motion, a Garda car escorted me to Newlands Cross And then from Newlands Cross, another Garda car escorted me to the door. It indicates some of the kind of people who supported him.
On February 7th, the party gathered in Leinster House. Could Haughey beat the odds once more?
People spoke their minds at these meetings, sometimes in a quite vicious way.
You were being accused almost of treason, and you know that you had no valid reason for being worried about him and worried about the style of leadership.
I said, this party has lost its soul. And I said to the party, you know, give us back our soul. I felt that the party had lost everything that it stood for.
I remember after 16 or 17 hours of that meeting, the vote was taken late at night.
The vote was 40 against the motion, 33 for. Accordingly, Mr. Charles J. Haughey remains the democratically elected leader.
No, I'm not going to talk about it now, please.
You're not united behind me anyway.
For the third time in a year, Haughey had survived. But victory had come at a heavy price.
After the result of the heave, when everybody was breaking up, I went into Mr. Haughey, and he said, "You want to see me?" And I said, "Yes, I have a short message for you. If there is another heave, I just want to tell you that I will not be supporting you." He said he was sorry to hear it, and that, but he accepted it and thanked me for at least having the decency to come in and tell him to his face. I wouldn't be where I was but for him. I have to leave it for the moment.
Those who sought to weaken or to confuse us have failed.
For the first time, Charles Haughey was the undisputed leader of Fianna Fáil. Dissent had been virtually silenced, at least for now.
He had now been endorsed by the party on 3 occasions, so I just gave up. I said, look, I have no mandate to carry on, and I wouldn't be troubling him anymore.
People had said to me that Charlie was a very vindictive man and he would never forgive me. Charlie did not show any vindictiveness towards me. If he had, I would never have become Lord Mayor of Dublin. He was the supreme politician.
But Haughey had one last piece of unfinished business.
There was constant feeling of awful, sort of gut-wrenching tension. The whole thing was terribly unpleasant. And you were, you know, wishing to goodness it could get itself resolved one way or another.
For 2 years, Haughey bided his time. In February 1985, he chose his moment to strike.
It came to a vote on a family planning bill, which they wanted to oppose at all costs. They told me that I had to vote against it, and I said I wasn't prepared to do it. So I didn't.
In fact, he went to the races in Leopardstown that afternoon when the vote was taking place.
I could see by that stage that the bill was going to pass, and I felt I'd made my point.
Haughey summoned O'Malley to a meeting of the party's national executive. Now they would decide his future.
What's your feeling going into the meeting?
Are you confident?
I'm not confident, no.
Is this not all pre-decided? Not at all. How could it be pre-decided? He gets his opportunity, he's been summoned, he's going to appear, I take it, and make his point of view. Here was a man who had done all of this unbelievable damage to the party. A lot of people felt it was coming for a long time. Good evening, Mr. Haughey. Charlie.
I discovered, of course, that the chief judge, Mr. Haughey, who was presiding at the National Executive, was also the chief prosecutor.
Charlie summed up in support of the motion, saying that basically enough was enough.
Emmett's speech from the dock wouldn't have saved me that night, because it was obvious that I was a goner.
The motion was put to a vote and was 6 or 7 votes in favour of Desi O'Malley and something over 60 in favour of his expulsion.
I hope that's not conduct unbecoming, no?
I was glad to be free. I couldn't stick it any longer. People like me no longer had any real influence within the party. And if you were going to do something for the country, you wouldn't have to do it from outside.
I had to go to break the news to a rather unsympathetic political correspondence audience. From here on in, I said, it's uno duce, una voce. One leader, one voice. Remember that. And I started goose-stepping up and down the concourse room. A total piss take. I mean, I didn't mean it. No, everybody knew I didn't mean it. But Geraldine, Madame, was there with a pen. She wrote it down. But the following Tuesday, the cruiser was writing, and of course he said, now we know the truth. The mask has slipped, you know, the real voice of Haughey is revealed. Charlie didn't pick it up for a long time. But one day anyway, he said, by the way, you know that uno duce una voce thing? What is it, he said. I said, it's Italian, sir. He said, I know it's fucking Italian, he said, but who said it? And I said, Mussolini. He said, oh, Jesus Christ, you really are out to ruin me, aren't you? And I said,
I belong to a race of people that have been on this island for a very, very long time.
Adrift in opposition, Haughey used the time to cultivate his image as a man concerned with loftier ideals than mere politics.
Under Bearben Bulben's head, in Drumcliff churchyard, Yeats is laid. An ancestor was rector there, long years ago. A church stands near.
It's the kind of stuff that Haughey had crammed his memory full of. You know, the importance of, you know, Irish identity and Irish heritage and culture and all this sort of vacuous stuff, you know.
Patrick Pearse was an idealist, a visionary, a revolutionary. Such men were dangerous to empires.
He was very reflective about politics, about public life, about public affairs. He thought a lot about what kind of things that he would like to do, were he back in government, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah. The other way round. It's the other way round. Quick look in here first. Oh, in here, sorry. Yes.
While Garret Fitzgerald's government floundered, Haughey could afford to stand back from the fray. But when the Fine Gael leader had a rare success with the Anglo-Irish agreement, Haughey's sharp political instincts re-emerged.
As leader of the opposition, I see it as a national political disaster. I know from the general public point of view there's a widespread feeling of anger and resentment and humiliation.
His opposition to the agreement was a mistake. Sending Brian Lennon to America to depose was a mistake, from his point of view as well as from the country's point of view. I don't think he had a sufficient understanding of the complexity of the Northern Ireland situation. He was reacting emotionally to it.
I think one would have to say that, and you know, I bear some responsibility for this as well, since I was advising him at the time. We misread the Anglo-Irish agreement, and I think there was a certain price, a certain political price, paid for that.
Haughey played politics with the agreement, but behind the scenes he was about to embark on a high-risk northern strategy. The key figure behind the initiative tells the story of Haughey's secret talks for the first time.
I'm a Redemptorist. I live in Clonard Monastery off the Falls Road, which was right in the centre of the conflict. We used to go to the funerals of everybody as far as we could, you know, and we saw, and we met meeting the victims, the wives, and the mothers and fathers, and felt we had a responsibility to do something about it. From the word go, really, we were trying to get the Dublin government involved. And at that time, nobody would talk to Sinn Féin unless the IRA stopped. Our early efforts failed, so I decided that what I was going to do was going to write to Mr. Haughey. I remember saying, this is the last throw of the dice. We've nowhere else to go after this. If this doesn't work, that's it.
There was a possibility that if we pursue this initiative, it could work. Even if the odds were against one, if there was a reasonable chance, it was worth it.
Then I got word to go, it was a Saturday morning, to go to Kinseely to meet him. And I must have talked for an hour or more. Mr. Haughey never said anything, he just sat there. He was a very good listener, just sat there, and he was, but his expression was encouraging, you know what I mean? You know, he had a positive attitude, a friendly attitude, an interested attitude.
Haughey would later instruct Martin Mansur to begin a secret dialogue with Sinn Féin. It was a key moment in the fledgling peace process.
He was taking a very big political risk. There could have been, at the very least, an enormous furore if it had become public, but it didn't become public.
Basically, he said, he like John Hume, he was going to support this. He was going to help us.
But Haughey could do little while he remained in opposition. His chance came in early '87.
The general election will take place on Tuesday, 17th February, and New Dáil will resume on the 10th of March.
One major obstacle, however, stood in Haughey's way.
Introducing Des O'Malley, the leader of the Progressive Democrats.
Founded by O'Malley in 1986, the Progressive Democrats had already poached TDs from Fianna Fáil.
Really thrilled, of course, that Bobby Malloy has joined us.
Now the PDs threaten to take Fianna Fáil seats in the election.
Fianna Fáil government with a majority, yes.
Mary Carney has topped the poll.
The PDs are firmly established west of the Shannon.
PDs truly have broken the mould here.
It will win something in the region of 14, 15, 16.
I'm sure you must find that disappointing.
I would imagine we would have done a great deal better had they not done so well.
They got 14 seats. And they denied Fianna Fáil the majority on that occasion, in simple terms.
But despite the PD's success, O'Malley failed to keep Haughey out of power. With the support of independents, Fianna Fáil formed a minority government. As Haughey settled back into office, some unfinished business remained. Once again, his personal finances needed attention. Des Traynor went looking for money.
Des contacted me and he said that Charlie had a financial problem. He owed money to the banks, I think in the order of $1 million or 1.2 million, etc. And he was looking for a number of donors to put up 200,000.
They were putting a consortium together of 10 people. And I said, if you're putting a consortium together, I think you should make it as few as possible, because I had a great belief, and still have, that Christ picked 12 apostles and one of them crucified him.
Haughey could not know it, but the solution to his financial problems would one day cost him everything.
It was agreed that I would make available $1 million.
It's going to be tough, and there will be setbacks. We're going to see it through.